Hello, my friend. I'm glad you are here today. Maybe you clicked this video because English feels heavy on your tongue. Maybe you understand English in your head, but when you speak, your voice shakes and the words come out wrong. If that sounds familiar, you are not alone. This story begins with someone just like you. His name was Daniel. He was smart, hardworking, and full of ideas. At work, he was the one who solved problems quietly. On paper, he was excellent. But the moment a meeting started and English filled the room, Daniel disappeared. His shoulders tightened, his heart beat faster, and his accent suddenly felt louder than his thoughts. He knew the answers, but fear stood between his mind and his mouth. Daniel believed a dangerous lie. He thought his accent meant he was not good enough. Every time someone asked him to repeat a sentence, he felt smaller. He started speaking less. Not because he had nothing to say, but because he was tired of feeling embarrassed. Each silence slowly erased his confidence. One evening, after a long day, Daniel sat alone at his desk. He opened his laptop to practice English, then closed it again. He told himself, "What's the point? I will never sound right." That night, something small but important happened. He remembered his father's words from years ago. Clarity matters more than perfection. People listen to meaning, not music. That sentence stayed with him. The next day, Daniel made a quiet decision. He would stop trying to sound perfect. Instead, he would focus on being clear. He began speaking slowly. He used simple words. He allowed pauses. When he made mistakes, he did not apologize. He continued. At first, nothing magical happened. His accent was still there. His grammar was not perfect. But something changed inside him. He was no longer hiding. People started listening longer. They asked questions. They understood him. For the first time, Daniel realized that his accent was not a wall. His fear was. Weeks passed. Daniel practiced every day, not to erase his accent, but to strengthen his confidence. He read aloud. He recorded his voice. He spoke even when his hands trembled, and each time he did, the fear lost a little power. One day, during a meeting, Daniel explained an idea clearly and calmly. When he finished, the room was quiet. Then his manager smiled and said, "That's a great point." In that moment, Daniel understood something important. English was never the enemy. The real battle was believing he deserved to be heard. This story is not about Daniel alone. It is about anyone who feels trapped by their accent. You do not need to sound like someone else to speak English well. You need clarity, you need courage, and you need to keep going, even when your voice shakes. This journey starts here, step by step, word by word. Confidence grows, and one day, you will speak not to impress, but to express. Daniel did not wake up confident the next morning. Confidence does not work like a switch. It grows slowly, like a muscle that hurts before it gets stronger. When he woke up, the same fear was there. The same voice in his head said, "Your accent will betray you again." But this time, Daniel did something different. Instead of arguing with that voice, he let it speak. Then he stood up anyway. On the way to work, he practiced simple sentences in his mind. Not big words, not fancy grammar, just clear ideas. "I think this can work. We should try another way. I don't understand this part." He repeated them calmly, like training his brain to stop running away. At the office, Daniel usually avoided small talk. He believed every casual conversation was a test he would fail. But that day, when a colleague asked, "How was your weekend?" he answered slowly and honestly. He did not rush. He did not hide. He spoke like a human, not like a student. Something unexpected happened. The colleague listened. He did not interrupt. He did not judge. He smiled and replied naturally. That short moment surprised Daniel more than any grammar lesson ever had. Later that day, Daniel noticed something important. People were not focusing on his accent the way he was. They were focused on understanding his message. Most people are busy with their own thoughts, their own fears. They are not waiting to judge you. They are waiting to understand you. That realization hit him hard. For years, Daniel had been fighting an invisible enemy. He thought fluency meant sounding perfect. But fluency was actually about flow, about continuing even when things were not smooth. That evening, Daniel changed his practice routine. He stopped repeating single words. He stopped chasing native sounds. Instead, he practiced full thoughts. He told stories to an empty room. He explained his day out loud. He described problems and solutions as if someone was listening. At first, his sentences were broken. Sometimes he stopped. Sometimes he forgot words. But he did not stop speaking. He learned a powerful habit. When a word did not come, he described it. When a sentence felt wrong, he finished it anyway. This habit changed everything. Daniel realized that communication is not about perfection. It is about movement. As long as you keep moving forward, the listener moves with you. Days passed, and something inside him started to settle. His voice became steadier, not because his accent disappeared, but because his fear did. He began to trust that even imperfect English could still be strong. One night, Daniel looked at himself in the mirror and spoke clearly. My accent is part of my story. My voice deserves space. I am allowed to be heard. This was not motivation. This was acceptance. And acceptance was stronger than fear. The journey was far from over. But for the first time, Daniel was walking forward instead of hiding. And that made all the difference. Daniel slowly began to understand something most learners never notice. The accent was not the problem. The real problem was tension. Every time he tried to sound perfect, his body became stiff. His breath became shallow. His voice lost its natural rhythm. English did not fail him. He failed himself by forcing it. So he made a new rule. He would speak English the same way he spoke his own language. Calm, human, imperfect. He started with breathing. Before speaking, he took one slow breath. Not to relax for the audience, but to relax for himself. When he spoke, he allowed silence. He did not rush to fill every gap. Silence, he learned, was not weakness. It was control. At work, Daniel noticed another change. When he spoke slowly, people leaned in. When he paused, people waited. His accent did not disappear, but his message became clearer. Clarity created respect. One afternoon, a new employee joined the team. She struggled with English even more than Daniel once had. She avoided meetings. She stayed quiet. Daniel recognized the fear immediately. He saw himself in her silence. During a break, he spoke to her gently. He did not correct her. He did not teach grammar. He simply listened. She spoke slowly. She made mistakes. And nothing bad happened. That moment changed Daniel again. He realized English was not a test. It was a bridge. And bridges do not need to be beautiful. They need to be strong. That night, Daniel practiced speaking with intention. Not longer, not louder, clearer. He focused on stress and meaning, not accent. He practiced emphasizing key words. He practiced ending sentences with confidence instead of doubt. He stopped saying sorry when he made mistakes. He stopped explaining himself. He trusted the listener. Day by day, his voice became more stable, not because it sounded native, but because it sounded certain. One evening, Daniel recorded himself speaking for 10 minutes. When he listened back, he expected embarrassment. Instead, he heard something new. He heard confidence. He heard growth. He heard a man who was no longer hiding. He smiled quietly. English had not changed him. It had revealed him. And deep inside, Daniel understood the truth that would guide the rest of his journey. Mastering an accent is not about sounding like others. It is about sounding like yourself, without fear. Daniel began to notice how people reacted to his voice, not his accent. When he spoke with hesitation, they became impatient. When he spoke with calm confidence, they listened. The words were almost the same. The difference was how he carried them. He started observing fluent speakers around him, not to copy their accent, but to understand their behavior. They were not afraid of pauses. They did not panic when they made small mistakes. They trusted that the listener would follow them. That trust was powerful. Daniel practiced this trust every day. In the shower, he explained his plans for the day. While walking, he described what he saw around him. At night, he told short stories out loud. He did not stop to correct himself. He did not rewind. He moved forward. At first, this felt uncomfortable. His brain wanted to fix everything, but he resisted. He understood that real conversations do not allow rewinds. Life does not wait for perfect sentences. One day, during a presentation, Daniel lost a word. The old version of him would have frozen. This time, he did something new. He described the idea in another way. He used simpler words. The meaning survived. The audience understood. The moment passed. That single moment gave him more confidence than months of silent study. Daniel realized something important. Fluency is not about speed. Fast speech often hides fear. Real fluency is about control, about choosing words carefully and delivering them with purpose. He also stopped comparing himself to native speakers. That comparison had stolen years of his progress. Native speakers grew up inside the language. Daniel chose the language. That choice itself was strength. As days passed, English stopped feeling like an enemy. It became a tool to share ideas, a tool to connect, a tool to grow. Daniel still had an accent. He still made mistakes, but now his voice carried weight. People remembered what he said, not how he said it. Late one evening, Daniel wrote a sentence in his notebook and underlined it twice. Being understood is more important than sounding perfect. That sentence became his anchor. He knew the journey was long. Mastery does not arrive in one moment. But for the first time, he was not chasing an accent. He was building a voice, and that voice was finally his. Daniel reached a point where practice stopped feeling like punishment. It became routine, just like brushing his teeth or checking his phone. English slowly entered his daily life without asking for permission. He stopped waiting for the perfect time to speak. He spoke when his sentence was ready, not when it was perfect. This small change removed a heavy pressure from his mind. One morning, while waiting for coffee, Daniel heard two people speaking English behind him. Normally, he would stay silent. That day, he turned around and joined the conversation. His heart beat faster, but his voice stayed steady. He asked a simple question. The conversation flowed. Nothing broke. Nothing collapsed. That moment stayed with him all day. Daniel realized that courage was not loud. It was quiet and consistent. It showed up in small moments, not dramatic ones. At work, he began volunteering to explain ideas. Not long explanations, just clear ones. When someone misunderstood him, he repeated the idea differently instead of repeating the same sentence louder. This skill changed how people responded to him. He learned another lesson. When people do not understand, it is not always because your English is bad. Sometimes it is because your idea needs a clearer shape. So Daniel started shaping his thoughts before speaking. He asked himself 3 silent questions. What is my main point? Why does it matter? What do I want the listener to do? With these questions, his speech became organized. His confidence grew naturally. At night, Daniel reflected on how far he had come. Months ago, English controlled his emotions. Now, he controlled his pace. Fear still appeared, but it no longer stopped him. He stopped hiding his accent. He owned it. It became part of his identity, not a weakness. People recognized his voice. Some even liked it. One evening, Daniel helped a colleague prepare for a presentation. She was nervous about her English. He did not give her grammar rules. He told her one thing: speak like you believe your idea matters. She followed that advice. Her presentation went well. Daniel smiled quietly. Teaching someone else showed him how much he had learned. English was no longer a wall. It was a path built step by step, mistake by mistake, choice by choice. And Daniel kept walking forward. Daniel entered a phase where English stopped feeling like something separate from him. It was no longer a task. He switched on and off. It became part of how he thought, part of how he explained the world to himself. He noticed that when he thought in English, he did not try to impress anyone. His thoughts were simple, direct, honest. That simplicity began to appear in his speaking too. Before, Daniel tried to sound intelligent by using complex words. Now, he understood that intelligence is clarity. The clearer his message, the stronger it felt. During meetings, he began preparing differently. Instead of memorizing sentences, he prepared ideas. He wrote short points, not full paragraphs. This gave him freedom. Freedom to adapt. Freedom to breathe. One day, something unexpected happened. A senior manager asked Daniel for his opinion in front of everyone. The old fear tried to rise, but Daniel did not fight it. He accepted it. Then he spoke. His voice was calm. His words were simple. He explained his idea step by step. When he finished, the manager nodded. Others nodded too. No one mentioned his accent. No one corrected his grammar. That moment changed how Daniel saw himself. He realized he had crossed an invisible line. He was no longer someone who was learning English. He was someone who used English. After that day, Daniel allowed himself to make mistakes publicly. This was the biggest shift of all. He understood that mistakes were not enemies. They were signals of growth. He also learned to listen better. When others spoke, he paid attention to how ideas were structured. He noticed patterns. He noticed how people introduced ideas, supported them, and concluded them. He borrowed structures, not sentences. At home, Daniel practiced speaking with intention. He recorded short reflections. He listened not for errors, but for strength. He asked himself one question: was my message clear? If the answer was yes, he moved on. Days turned into weeks. English became lighter. Conversations felt less like battles and more like exchanges. One evening, Daniel realized something deeply personal. He was no longer afraid of being judged. Not because people stopped judging, but because he stopped needing their approval. His voice carried experience. Now, it carried effort. It carried honesty. Daniel understood the final truth of this stage. Confidence does not come after fluency. Fluency comes after confidence. And once that truth settled in him, the journey stopped feeling heavy. Daniel began to understand that real progress is often quiet. There was no big moment where he suddenly felt fluent. Instead, there were many small moments where fear showed up and left without winning. He started paying attention to how he reacted after speaking. Before, he used to replay every sentence in his head, searching for mistakes. Now, he focused on the result. Did the other person understand him? Did the conversation move forward? If the answer was yes, he let it go. This habit saved him a lot of mental energy. Daniel also learned to forgive himself faster. When he made a mistake, he did not punish himself internally. He corrected it calmly or continued speaking. He treated himself the way a patient teacher would. One day, he noticed something surprising. His mistakes were decreasing naturally, not because he was forcing accuracy, but because his brain was relaxed. Relaxation created space for improvement. He realized stress blocks learning. Calm invites it. Daniel changed the way he practiced listening as well. Instead of trying to understand every word, he listened for meaning. He focused on tone, intention, and key ideas. This made conversations easier and faster. When he did not understand something, he asked simple questions. He stopped pretending. He stopped nodding without understanding. This honesty made conversations real. People responded well to this. They repeated. They explained. They slowed down. Communication improved on both sides. Daniel understood something important. Speaking English is not a performance. It is cooperation. As his confidence grew, he started setting small challenges. One day, he would start a conversation. Another day, he would express a disagreement politely. Another day, he would tell a short story without preparation. These challenges were uncomfortable but manageable. Each one stretched him slightly. None of them broke him. One evening, Daniel attended a small gathering. People were talking, laughing, sharing stories. He joined naturally. He spoke when he had something to say. He listened when he did not. Time passed quickly. On the way home, he realized something powerful. He had not thought about his English at all. That was the moment he understood progress. Fluency is not the absence of mistakes. It is the absence of fear. Daniel no longer needed to sound perfect to feel valid. He sounded human, and that was enough. He knew the journey was still going. There was more to learn, more to refine. But now, the direction was clear. He was no longer chasing fluency. He was living it. Daniel reached a stage where English became something he trusted. He no longer checked every sentence before speaking. He trusted that his words would arrive when needed. This trust did not come from talent. It came from repetition, from showing up every day, even when progress felt slow. He noticed that his thoughts were clearer now. When he spoke English, he organized his ideas naturally. He did not jump between points. He stayed focused. This made people feel comfortable listening to him. Daniel also became more aware of his voice. He learned how to lower it slightly to sound calmer. He learned how to stress important words. He learned how to end sentences with confidence instead of uncertainty. These small changes had a big effect. People began asking him questions, not because he was fluent, but because he was clear. One afternoon, someone asked Daniel how he improved his English so much. He smiled and gave an honest answer. "I stopped fighting it." That answer surprised even him. He realized that for years he had treated English like an enemy, something to defeat, something that judged him. Once he changed that mindset, everything shifted. Daniel also learned to enjoy not knowing everything. When he heard a new word, he did not panic. He stayed present. He guessed the meaning from context. Later, he looked it up calmly. This removed pressure from conversations. He also stopped translating in his head. He allowed English to exist on its own. At first, this felt strange. Then it felt natural. Daniel understood another important lesson. You do not become fluent by studying harder. You become fluent by living inside the language. He made English part of his routine. News podcasts while walking, short reflections while driving, simple notes at night. Nothing extreme, just consistent. One evening Daniel reflected on how far he had come. He remembered the days when he avoided speaking, when he felt small, when he felt limited. Those days felt distant now, not because his English was perfect, but because his mindset was strong. He knew one thing for sure: if he could change his relationship with English, anyone could. And that thought gave him quiet pride. The journey continued, but now it felt lighter. Daniel woke up one morning with a strange feeling. It was not excitement, not fear, not pressure. It was calm determination. He realized that the months of practice had quietly changed him. English was no longer a test or a burden. It was a tool, a way to express himself and connect with others. He thought about the moments when he used to freeze in meetings, when his heart beat fast and he could not speak. Back then, he believed that his accent and mistakes defined him. Today, he understood the truth. Fear was the enemy of English. Fear stopped him. Courage moved him forward. At work, Daniel began noticing small changes in how people responded to him. His ideas were taken seriously. His contributions were valued. Colleagues stopped commenting on how he spoke. They listened for what he said. That was progress. He could feel and see. Daniel also began experimenting with storytelling. He noticed that people remembered stories better than facts or instructions. So he started sharing short stories about challenges, lessons learned, and small victories. At first, his stories were simple, rough around the edges, but authentic. People connected with them. They asked questions. They laughed. They nodded. Daniel felt understood. One afternoon, he joined a meeting with several senior managers. He felt a brief flicker of his old fear, but he took a slow breath and focused on his message. He presented his idea clearly, step by step. When he finished, there was a pause, then nods and approval. No one mentioned his accent. No one laughed. No one doubted him, just understanding. That simple acknowledgement was more powerful than any perfect sentence he had ever tried to memorize. After the meeting, Daniel reflected on what had changed. He no longer sought perfection. He sought clarity. He no longer compared himself to others. He compared himself to yesterday. Each step forward mattered. Each mistake was a lesson. Each small conversation built his confidence. He also became aware of the importance of listening. Real communication is two-way. For months he had focused only on speaking, on correcting himself, on avoiding mistakes. Now, he noticed that by listening carefully, he could respond more effectively. He noticed tone, pauses, emphasis, the meaning behind words. This helped him anticipate questions, explain more clearly, and connect emotionally with his audience. Daniel's evenings became a time for reflection and gentle practice. He spoke aloud about his day. He explained problems and solutions to himself. He narrated small observations from his life. Sometimes he recorded himself. Listening back, he noticed progress in clarity, organization, and flow. He stopped criticizing mistakes. He learned to see them as markers of effort and courage. One evening, while speaking to his reflection in the mirror, Daniel said a sentence that would stay with him forever. I am allowed to speak. I am allowed to be understood. I am allowed to be heard. These words were simple but powerful. They reminded him that English was not a gatekeeper to success. Confidence was. Understanding this was his turning point. The next few weeks, Daniel focused on challenges he had avoided before. He started short presentations at work, joined casual conversations with new colleagues, and even participated in online discussions. Each moment was uncomfortable at first. Each moment tested his courage, but with each step, he felt the fear shrink and his voice grow. One afternoon, he helped a new team member practice English for a project. He gave advice not about grammar or pronunciation, but about clarity and courage. Speak to express, not to impress, he said. The new member followed this advice and spoke confidently. Daniel realized then that teaching someone else was reinforcing his own lessons. It reminded him of how far he had come. Daniel's life started to feel lighter. He no longer measured progress by perfection or by how others perceived him. He measured it by action, courage, and clarity. Mistakes were no longer enemies, but guides. Each conversation, each sentence, each story shared was proof of growth. At night, Daniel often reflected on his journey. He remembered the days when he dreaded speaking English, when he avoided opportunities, stayed quiet, and felt invisible. Those days were still part of his story, but they no longer defined him. He had changed, not just in English, but in how he approached challenges, fear, and growth. He also learned the power of patience. Progress does not happen overnight. Confidence does not appear in a single moment. It grows quietly, with consistent action. Every sentence spoken, every story shared, every mistake allowed without shame contributed to that growth. By the end of the month, Daniel could speak English with clarity, honesty, and courage. Not perfectly, but effectively. Not flawlessly, but powerfully. People listened. They understood. They remembered him for his ideas, not his accent. And Daniel finally understood a lesson far bigger than English. Life is not about avoiding mistakes. Life is about moving forward despite them. Success does not require perfection. It requires courage, patience, and persistence. Daniel smiled quietly to himself. He realized that the journey was still ongoing. There would always be new words to learn, new conversations to have, new challenges to face. But he now had the tools, the mindset, and the courage to continue. And that made all the difference. Daniel woke up one morning feeling something he had never felt before. Anticipation instead of fear. He realized that his relationship with English had completely changed. It was no longer a source of anxiety. It was a tool, a companion, a way to express his thoughts and connect with the world. This shift in perspective made every word he spoke lighter, freer, and more confident. At work, Daniel noticed a change in how meetings felt. Before, he would shrink in his chair, avoiding eye contact whenever English came into play. Now, he took a seat with intention, ready to contribute, even if his sentences were not perfect. He spoke slowly, clearly, and with focus. Each word carried meaning, and he noticed that people listened differently. They did not focus on his accent or on minor grammar mistakes. They focused on the ideas he shared, and that was what mattered most. He also began experimenting with storytelling more deliberately. Daniel understood that stories had the power to make information memorable. He shared small narratives about challenges, lessons learned, and everyday observations. At first, the stories were rough, simple, and sometimes incomplete. Yet, they had authenticity. People connected with them, asked questions, laughed, and sometimes even shared similar experiences. Through this process, Daniel discovered that speaking English was not just about correctness. It was about connection, clarity, and courage. Outside work, Daniel expanded his practice. He recorded short reflections about his day, described what he saw during his walks, and narrated moments from his life to himself. He did not edit, correct, or judge his sentences. Instead, he he focused on expressing his thoughts fully. Over time, these simple daily habits strengthened not only his fluency, but also his confidence. Speaking English became less of a task and more of a natural extension of his daily life. One day, Daniel participated in a company discussion where new strategies were being brainstormed. His old fear attempted to return, whispering doubts and reminding him of past embarrassments. But Daniel had learned to act despite fear. He spoke clearly, laid out his points in logical steps, and answered questions patiently. The other participants listened attentively, asked for clarification, and even praised his insights. For the first time, Daniel felt that he was seen, not as someone struggling with English, but as someone with valuable ideas and perspective. This realization was transformative. He understood that fluency is not measured by the absence of mistakes, but by the ability to communicate effectively despite them. Each time he chose to speak, each time he expressed his ideas with honesty, he strengthened a skill far more important than perfect pronunciation: confidence. Daniel also noticed how his listening skills had improved. Earlier, he had been anxious, always thinking about how he would respond rather than truly listening. Now, he focused on understanding others. He paid attention to tone, pace, emphasis, and context. This helped him respond more thoughtfully, adapt his own explanations, and create meaningful dialogue. Communication became a two-way process, and Daniel began to feel at ease in conversations that once terrified him. At night, he would reflect on the progress he had made. The man who had once frozen during simple conversations had grown into someone who could navigate meetings, participate in discussions, and share stories comfortably. He recognized that the journey was not about avoiding mistakes, but about embracing growth. Each misstep was a lesson, each pause a chance to choose clarity over speed. He began helping others too. When a new colleague struggled with English, Daniel did not lecture on grammar or pronunciation. Instead, he offered guidance on clarity and courage. Focus on expressing your ideas, he advised. Speak to be understood, not to be perfect. The advice worked, and seeing others succeed reinforced Daniel's own lessons. Teaching became another form of practice, deepening his understanding of effective communication. Over time, Daniel internalized a critical truth: language is more than words. It is intention, clarity, and the courage to continue even when mistakes occur. He understood that English was never the enemy, fear was, and courage, once chosen repeatedly, became a habit. Daniel's journey was far from over. There were still moments of doubt, new words to learn, and unfamiliar situations to navigate. But now, he faced them with a sense of calm strength. He no longer measured progress by comparison with others. He measured it by his own growth, by the steps he took every day, by the courage he summoned in ordinary moments. And as he prepared for the next day, Daniel realized that the most important lesson had nothing to do with vocabulary, grammar, or accent. It had to do with life itself. Consistent effort, clear intention, and courage in action always lead to progress. The voice that once shook with fear now spoke with quiet confidence, and that was a victory far greater than any perfect sentence could ever provide. Daniel knew that the journey was not finished, but he also realized that he had already come a long way. The fear that once stopped him in meetings and conversations had lost its power. He spoke with intention, clarity, and courage. Mistakes still happened, but they no longer mattered. Each mistake was a step forward, a lesson learned, and proof that he was moving. He began to share his story with friends and colleagues who struggled with English. He explained how small consistent actions, practicing speaking every day, and focusing on clarity rather than perfection, could change everything. People listened. They asked questions. Some even followed his advice and slowly discovered their own confidence. Teaching others reminded Daniel of how far he had come and reinforced his own growth. Daniel continued his daily habits. He narrated stories aloud, recorded his reflections, and spoke with himself in English whenever he had a moment alone. He stopped overthinking. He stopped trying to memorize perfect sentences. Instead, He focused on expressing ideas naturally, flowing from thought to speech. He noticed that when he relaxed, communication became easier, and conversations felt alive. At work, Daniel became more involved. He offered ideas, led small discussions, and helped others clarify their thoughts. People no longer noticed his accent. They noticed his ideas, his calm voice, and the value he brought. His confidence inspired others. They began to speak more, try more, and make mistakes without fear. Daniel had become an example of what persistence and courage could achieve. One day, Daniel reflected on the transformation. He remembered the long nights of practice, the moments of shame, and the fear that once controlled him. He remembered hiding during conversations and avoiding opportunities. And now, here he was, able to speak, to be understood, to teach, and to connect. He realized that all the effort had been worth it. Daniel understood the ultimate lesson. Language is not a barrier. It is a bridge built step by step, word by word, mistake by mistake, courage by courage. Every effort he had made, every sentence spoken, every story shared had created that bridge. And now, he could cross it freely. The fear would never disappear completely. Challenges would continue. New words, new situations, new conversations would test him. But Daniel no longer needed perfection. He needed courage, clarity, and persistence. That was enough. That was more than enough. As he closed his day, Daniel spoke quietly to himself. The same words he had learned over the months. I am allowed to speak. I am allowed to be understood. I am allowed to be heard. These words were simple, yet they carried a lifetime of growth. They reminded him that the journey was ongoing, but he was prepared. And now, Daniel's story comes to you. Remember his lessons. Speak with courage. Focus on clarity. Embrace mistakes. Keep moving forward. Your voice matters, and the world is waiting to hear it. Goodbye for now. And keep speaking, keep growing, and never let fear control your words.